Palco board. As a reminder, we record these meetings and post them to our website. Members are invited to ask questions or share comments during the first part of the meeting. If you have a question or comment, feel free to type it into the chat or raise your hand, and we'll put you in the queue. Every member gets 3 minutes to make your comments. Otherwise, please keep yourself muted and your video turned off during the meeting. The materials for today's meeting are posted in our document library on the website at opalco.com. We post them each week preceding the board meeting. So a couple of quick updates while people decide if they're going to comment this morning. Starting next week, the East Sound office is going to be temporarily relocated to 208 Enchanted Forest Road, which is next to the saw shop. So we're going to have our normal hours there, and Monday through Thursday, 8 to 5. I also wanted to remind everyone that we're doing a lot of maintenance upgrades to our critical infrastructure. So you may see roads rerouted or different updates about the projects we're doing. We encourage everyone to check our Facebook page, and we'll have updates about if there'll be traffic slowdowns or you'll see some flaggers out rerouting you. So, and we had some drones doing some line work the other week, so we had that on our website. So keep safety first and drive slow in those construction zones.
Krista, just following on that, I was trying to describe to somebody on responding to their social media question about the drones, and I found it really difficult to find the link about our drone work. So if you could maybe either post that on social media again or...
Okay. And then I see that David Robison has his hand raised. So would you like to unmute yourself and make your comment? Yeah, no problem. I think he's finding his unmute, so.
Sorry about that. Good morning. David Robeson from San Juan Island. And I wanted to speak in favor of the microgrid and other alternative energy projects that Opalco has been working on for a number of years. We need to decarbonize for the sake of our environment, and we also need to have more local power production since our grid is no longer as reliable as it has been in the past. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
All right. Does anyone else want to make a comment that's here attending the meeting today that's a member? Great. Well, I don't see anyone off the top of my head, so I'll go ahead and share our board packet and you can get started, Vince.
Great. Thank you, Krista. Appreciate it. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our regular board meeting, June 19th, 2025. I'm going to start out this morning with our action items. First is the consent agenda. I trust you've all had a chance to read through the items on that. So I'll be looking for a motion to approve those items.
So moved.
Mark?
Yeah.
Second.
And Brian's a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? None, that is approved. Second, foster up member service policy, second read.
Yeah, this is the member service policy that we have for electric service. As we're going through our rate analysis and rate study, that's going to be a topic of discussion next. We want to make sure that our consultant that we're having help us, E3, has real good clarity on what our methodology is. And so this is the second read. If you can go down to the yellow zone, second read of the obligations that we're bound to as providing an electric service utility, as well as the methodology used to determine our rates. So this is the second read. I think we've incorporated all the comments that the board had on the first read. And staff makes a recommendation to the board to approve the addition of the yellow highlighted areas to our policy 1.
You know, I read it again, and I actually think it's really well done. It took us a while, but I think it's actually just what we need to be doing.
Thanks, Brian.
Good. Do I hear a motion to approve this?
I move.
Brian? Is there a second?
Second.
That was Jerry. Any further discussion by the board?
No, I agree with Brian. This is well done.
Okay.
too.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Hearing none, that is approved. Thank you for that. It's good to get that updated. All right, Foster, E3 update.
Yeah, and I don't see E3 in the room yet, but they're going to be joining us shortly. Why don't we skip over this one and just
Okay.
keep going down the
Right.
board report?
Next one is the public EV charging update.
Hi, good morning.
Oh, wait.
Oh, it's Paul's there. Thanks for joining us, Paul. I think who else we got out there from E3?
We don't-
Yeah, let's just keep going then until you can give me a heads up, Krista.
Okay, Foster, PEVC.
Yeah, so this is a this was actually a interesting ad that we just put on. There was if you remember Bruce Benton over on Orcus, he's done a really good job getting grant funding for EV chargers. And we've been working with him getting helping him deploy those on Orcus. It's been interesting. He's been working really hard. He's been putting his soul into the effort. High marks to Bruce. There was also a fast charger that was part of what the installation was, and we have a little conflict in our board policies. And the board policy really doesn't encourage resale of electric energy, as you can imagine. We wouldn't want people to use our energy and make money on our members. So there's a no resale of electricity provision. But we did want to allow it when it comes to EVs. We get a lot of tourists that are coming on into the islands, and providing that is really good for our community and taking care of the people of our visitors. Anyway, so we're proposing, this is the first read, we're proposing to add a new EV section to policy number 4. If we can go down below in the yellow highlighted zone, what we're proposing is if you want to connect, say you're I think this one is we're working with the Port of Orcus to solidify this. So we're still trying to figure out all the details to go along with it. But preliminarily speaking, we're talking about providing kind of two scenarios. So say you're going to connect a level 3 charger, really expensive one that's really quick. What we're working together with the Port of Orcus is to allow a 2-tiered price. There's a tier 4 members, and we really want to make sure, we're all about the members and supporting the members. When it comes to that, what we're trying to do is approximate whatever the pass-through would be for the cost of the electric to go back to our members. So if you charged your electric vehicle, you would just pay the retail rate plus a little adder that approximates the demand charge that you would normally see on the electric charger side. And so there's a little example here. So what we're talking about on the first tier is to have our members treated like, say you would put in your member number and then you could get your power at a little discounted rate. It would be whatever you pay on the residential rate plus a little adder. In this instance, just for the example, we put in 2 cents. We would revisit that year annually during our budgeting process to see if we need to make any adjustments to it so it's fair to everybody involved. If you were a non-member, then it would be determined by the installer or the member that's installing the service. Remember, this would be a commercial installation, so it's a little bit differently on how we gauge what the dollars are, but we're going to be revisiting those annually as needed. But if you're going to be here a non-member, then we're going to allow the installer to recoup more of their costs for the charging equipment, if you will. Any questions? I know it's a little confusing there.
Foster, I think it's smart for us to have a resale policy, right? I mean, this resale policies are ubiquitous in the commercial world, and we should have
Right.
the last sentence of paragraph 1 of 495. If you could just explain what we mean by that. Resale of energy to others may be as needed for recuperation of the cost to provide the charging services. It seemed like a word was missing.
You know what, we were debating,
Maybe reviewed.
Yeah, I think that's
as
better.
needed? Or
Yeah.
it seems like there's a verb missing there.
Thank you for that. We'll clean
No
that
worries.
up. I mean,
Okay.
the intention that we have is just to make sure that we revisit those on an annual basis during our normal budgeting process.
Okay, so just reviewed as needed or reviewed annually or something like that.
Yeah, I'll change that. That was
All right.
something I thought it was already changed. And then the other thought was that if we had, say we had a really big power outage, that we would also reserve the right to either minimize or reduce the service down to the point where it's not an issue for like emergency services, that kind of.
Then I would add a clause there because what you've got there is if it's in violation of the policy and it doesn't say as needed to protect the distribution network or whatever.
You got it.
There are other portions of our policies that protect us in those measures as
So we don't
I think
really
it's
have to-
policy 13 takes care of that. for
Yeah,
each-
so we don't have to say it specifically.
I think we need to make sure we're really clear. I mean, if you're a person trying to get the charger, we should probably put that language there as well. Or we could at least refer to the policy
Yeah,
13.
just refer to 13.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Do you anticipate this as more level 3 larger charger likelihood of implementation, or does this cover smaller level 2s, which are less than 20 kW, but still could be a sizable load? Just kind of curious.
Yeah, it's really the commercial side level 3s that we're talking about, Tom. It's anyone who wants to resell their electricity real, to be accurate though. Most people that are going to be doing that are going to be the level 3. If you're going to put one of those in, you'll do it at like a gas station and so forth. In reality, I think it's going to be fine. Right now, the Bruce Benton concept is the charging or the grant basically stipulated that the charging was going to be behind the business. So the business would cover whatever those electrons or whatever the kWh cost would be.
Right.
And it would be free to the EV car owner when they go to fill up, so to say.
That's a customer amenity basically being offered.
Yeah.
Right.
And then this is a little different just because the level 3s are so much more expensive that opening it up to a charge point kind of thing that they can charge the the tourist however they determine, but we need to make sure that we safeguard our membership a little bit. I think most people are going to charge their EVs at home. It's going to have that little adder, remember, because we have the residential rate doesn't have a demand on it, so we have to put some kind of an adder on it to approximate it. I think people are going to realize that maybe it's even better for me to do it at home. So in reality, I don't think it's going to be really impactful, but we need to be very clear. We just need to update our policy accordingly.
It's interesting that there's a National Electric Code update that's mandating even in residential services, kind of a make-ready reserve capacity for EV charging load. And so if you look at any new builds, now you're having to bake in anticipated level 2 charger load, even if you don't install one, near term or ever. But that's now being mandated as part of the calculation for residential service. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think this is bring up a good point. I mean, this is at the beginning of it right now. I mean, we hope we can get vehicle to grid and we can actually monetize it and recoup some of the dollars if we can tap into some of the vehicle to grids that members own and pay them for it. That would be a good way to kind of add a few redundancy components to our grid too.
Sure.
So I just wanted to bring up one other use of EVs, especially on several of the islands, which is island rides. And so I'm kind of thinking through our policy, and you're mentioning people charge at home, but Island Rides charges at public chargers right now. And I know the one like at the Island Market, Opalco pays for the power. The Oddfellows have a charger, which they'd love to upgrade to level 2, but they can't afford the power for it. And Island Rides regularly charges there when they're dropping people off for activities at Oddfellows. And I don't know about on the other islands. So I didn't know if we wanted to also, and we don't have to do it now, but in our EV policy, come up with some idea around these like community services like the Island Rides and how we want to support them with the chargers.
You know what? But I was just driving by somebody like literally a couple of minutes ago, and saw Island Rides and I was like, yeah, that's going to be interesting to see how they play out. I'd love to get a poll on the board. Is that something that we would like to see as a member? An amount would Island Rides with the board support Islands Ride with a member discount as outlined?
I mean, I support it because the drivers are all volunteers. The cars have all been donated. I feel like it's really one of those important public services for our members. So I'd like to see Opalco supporting that.
All right, we could add that in there if there's support for that, Vince. We could.
I'm in support of it, but I was also in a conversation just yesterday at an EDC board meeting where some of the Orcas board members were bringing up ideas about other transportation services. So I think maybe we need to be in support of it, you know, maybe 6 months or a year at a time, reviewable. Because I think if other transportation services develop that are commercial or whatever, we can't have everybody coming to us for free support, right? We have to figure out.
Right.
So
I could probably frame it up as a nonprofit something. Would that work, Mark?
I think so. I think we just need to, as that landscape shifts, I love the fact that it's a volunteer run service. And I think that allows us to support them clearly without, you know, we're taking away from these members to support those members kind of thing.
Right.
Right.
I guess the other extent.
Can I speak up here for a second?
Yep.
Certainly.
And part of this isn't legal advice, but this is an exception to your rule that you don't allow members to resell services. And you might want to walk before you run on this. And just see, you know, I had to just conceptually think about this particular exception to make sure it fit within your tariffs and rates and standards. And I just have a little bit of concern that there's a level of complexity. I mean, there's obviously, you know, if you have level 2 and level 3 chargers at your offices, you know, you can provide those services to nonprofits, but just to carve out a carve out from a carve out just gets a little complicated. And maybe you might want to see if this works and find a different way to support those entities, but just my own thought.
Yeah, you know what made Joel ask, let me answer the question. I know that as long as we do it on a membership wide basis, your research is positive in the way that we're going, either a non-member, or we're treating everybody the
Yes.
same. I would think that if you have a member number, so if you're a member in your Island Rides and you have a home and you're a member, then this would satisfy it based on the way it's currently written. So maybe we already kind of evolved.
Maybe it's embedded in that, you know,
Yeah.
maybe you can do it that way on the back end. Yeah.
And if that's not the case and it evolves into something different, we're going to have to revisit the language then.
You know, I think we have to ask the question, to what extent is there an overlap between the ridership and membership, right? Members tend to be property owners here in a lot of ways.
So riders are residents of the island. Tourists aren't allowed to have rides in Island Rides. It's specifically for residents.
Understood, but we have a lot of residents who are not members because they're not property owners.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, that's the question. If we're taking the route that somebody should have a member number in order to be supported like this, then we have to look at the overlap between ridership and members to see if we're essentially creating a policy that has the empty set as its application.
We also include renters in that mix too.
Okay, then you're fine, right? That's where I was going with that. There is a little bit of a socioeconomic element to that particular.
Yeah.
That's a really good point, Wendy, is that I appreciate that point because they're still members. And if this is just kind of a quasi ownership kind of shared situation where a member's getting the ride, and that's consistent with what we are intending.
I think Joel's comment generally speaking is an important one, right? We as a utility have never had to deal much with resale, right? You don't pour electricity into a bucket and sell it to somebody, right? Electric vehicles are probably, and we're not in a situation where we have to deal with people stringing a lot of electrical cords to the neighbor next door kind of thing, like people do in Hawaii. So EVs are the first use case for a reasonable policy about commercial resale. So I think we should have a policy over time. And as Joel said, it may take some time to figure out exactly what that policy looks like in the long run.
I think there's another small part also is there are some free level 1 and level 2 chargers like the library and a few other places. And how do we deal with that? There's a national EV club, and there are people now on Lopez, and I think some other islands are looking about getting into that. One of the things they're looking to do that to become a club member, you put in some money, because one of the problems is these free ones, when they break, they just sit there. And they're looking to get money to repair them. And so how would we do something to address those, the free ones that we have?
The free ones need to disappear. We've been really struggling with those. Those are not really following our cost of service.
Right.
Okay.
Sure. I mean, it's the kind of thing that happens during the introductory phase of a
Right.
technology, right? And then it all has to, when it becomes ubiquitous, it's like all the rebates, right? Everybody thinking that there will be rebates forever. That's never the case.
But we,
Okay, so that's something we ought to think about how we would do that. They may be not for free, they might be not a business. They just want to make the product go through. They're not going to be making money. So how would we treat them? Would they get the same sort of lower cost?
Yeah, so the way that to make sure that Bruce Benton, that are you familiar with how his program is working?
Yep.
So what it does is he's reached out to different businesses on Orcus. I think it's very Orcus centric, by the way. And those businesses cover the cost of whatever those power charges are. And then they, because you have a captured audience that's going to go into their stores is the thought. And then he provides, business provides the no cost that goes with it. It's going to be interesting to see how that evolves too. But I know we're not done. I think Joel's right. Let's put a placer out here and evolve. The other thing is we're working with the Port of Orcas, and we have to talk to the vendors and see what's available and what's not, and what actually works from a practical perspective.
Yeah. Excuse me a second. Jay, I think he's got his hand up.
Oh, thanks, Vince. Yeah, Bruce and I are on the board of Island Rides, and I'll just mention that those level 2 chargers are all free, and there's dozens of them now around Orcas. The DC fast charger, though, is not free. It's 25 cents per kilowatt hour. And it's a very expensive system. We got a grant for it from Department of Commerce and WSDOT. And so, and by the way, 25 cents is a very good DC fast charge rate. On the mainland, typical DC fast charge rates, if you're subscription, you're 40 to 45 cents per kilowatt hour. And if you're not subscription with the charging service, then it's 50 to 60 cents per kilowatt hour. And by the way, a lot of DC fast chargers, I'm planning an EV road trip, and a lot of DC fast chargers on my route are provided by BC Hydro, for example, or major utilities along the route, and they have slightly lower rates than Tesla. Tesla is about 45 to 55 cents per kilowatt hour for DC fast chargers. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure that it's clear that this charger at the East Sound Airport is 25 cents per kilowatt hour.
I thought it was 35, but maybe I'm wrong.
I did a test charge on it 2 weeks ago, and I was charged 25, and I'm not sure if there's a time of use. And by the way, as we get more and more local solar generation, time of use rate for DC fast charging, encouraging daytime versus nighttime might be an interesting thing, because those things, they're charging at 100 plus kilowatts per session. a kind of typical mainland DC fast charger now can be, upwards of 350 kilowatts.
What that,
I'm thinking about, again, the nonprofit ones, the library. The swimming pool is going to have, I think, a level 1 or level 2. And how would we want to treat that? It's not a business.
Yeah, and in fact, the Island Rides level 2 chargers are all, free. And that's part of the grant deal that funded all of those chargers on Orcus was the provision of the energy to the public had to be at no cost.
you're bringing up a good example, Brian, that we just don't know yet.
We have to figure something out that's
Yeah,
reasonable.
Yeah, the thought is, when you go to Olympia, and this is where Joel always comes in, you go to Olympia and there's always trying to get new legislation around EV chargers because they want to encourage it and so forth. So we just got to be very mindful. There's a lot of bureaucracy that goes along with that. We don't own any of the chargers that charge anything. I think there's a lot of ramifications that go along that has Joel kind of watching over it. So we can come back at a later date if we decide to get into the game. The concept of the co-op though is if we did, the recommendation that we would have would be to charge the reasonable amount, which we're saying would apply to the members. So if we did want to put something over at the pool, we would say, in my mind, we would go member only kind of thing and charge them what would be appropriate of the cost that we're incurring for those charges, including the demand. And what Jay just said was, to me, was, the alarm bell was big demand costs that are going to be charged because it's a commercial rate.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. If they're members and they have a member number, then we have the technology to do that. I think that seems fair. And if we have tourists coming in, they'll pay whatever.
Right. I think there's another one too. There's another one over on San Juan I got wind of that we didn't hear about, which was one of the hotels over there. I think it was Earthbox.
Earthbox, yeah.
They may have one that we need to utilize this policy to kind of get everything in sync again.
I think we have enough to my little card that I have that I can stick in there.
I think we have enough to play out what we need to and do some rewrites based on what we learned from Orcus Port, and then we'll come back to you at the next meeting with little revisions. And if we have to kick this down for another meeting, we can always do that too if it's not clear.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Good.
Now I don't know if we got Paul and company here or not. There's Paul.
Yes,
Paul, are you good on your side?
We are good on our side.
Okay,
Joined by my colleagues Arnie and Ari as well. So we can dive into our updated presentation, and I'm happy to pull up unless Russell has it. Great.
That's great. Thanks for joining us. Good to see you, Ari and Arnie.
Yeah, it's great to be with this group again, and we're excited to provide some updates to the analysis we've been working on and some recommendations as well. So you can go to the next slide, please. Do we skip over the agenda? Well, I can quickly recap the agenda. There we go. So we plan to walk through updates on the residential class, the commercial class, as well as the pumps class. Starting with the residential class, we want to reiterate some of the findings from last session and review the rate design goals that we really have in mind here with this near-term update to rates. We also want to walk through a illustrative roadmap for updating the residential rates over the coming years and think through ideas of how different updates can be gradually phased in over time. We do have updates to the commercial class rates, both for small and large, as well as an exploration around combining the small and large commercial classes. We can walk through some considerations on making that change. And we have some bill impact analysis to help illustrate the impacts and trade-offs there. And then lastly, we do have updates to the pumps class, largely just following from the updated COSA analysis we did this year without any major rate design changes, just an update reflecting cost changes over time. So you can go to the next slide. I think yeah, there we go. So we've shown these rate design goals before, but we wanted to start, to ground the conversation again with, what the objectives are for these rate design changes. And we've, identified through conversations, 4 key goals that we have for this, current rate update. The first is really ensuring, fair contribution to fixed costs of the grid, from all customers, whether that's seasonal customers, rooftop customers, really ensuring that the way that Opalco recovers costs better aligns with the costs of the grid. Another important consideration is ensuring, financial health of the utility, ensuring Opalco can appropriately recover the revenue needed for operations, and particularly when, warm winters are low and, sales might not be recovering as much as expected. Another very important consideration is ensuring energy affordability of low-income customers. With any rate changes, you need to ensure that the low-income customers aren't seeing any price impacts or price spikes that would be harming those customers. And lastly, it is important to consider customer understanding and ease of utility implementation. So there's trade-offs between rate complexity and simplicity around both the customer side and as well as the utility side. So you can go to the next slide. We can go through this quickly as these were some recaps from the prior session. But first, walking through what we found on the residential rate class side, under the updated COSA, we do find that the allocation of cost to the residential class did increase, and we highlighted a number of factors, 2 in particular. Since 2018, when the prior COSA was done, the residential class has grown significantly. Both load and demand are up, while the commercial class has decreased both on the load and demand side. And we also noted other changes to the COSA methodology that we find better aligned with standard practices. And together these do result in a higher allocation to the residential class. But we really want to emphasize that some of these changes can be phased in gradually over time as well. We already walked through some of these rate design goals, particularly around revenue certainty and fair cost recovery. There are other goals that Opalco could look to address in the future, whether that's encouraging customer response or load flexibility. That's not a focus now, but could be more relevant, particularly as the rate or the cost structure changes, potentially with updated BPA contracts providing more variable price signals over the course of time. So two of the main rate levers that we evaluated were the demand charge and changes to the fixed customer charge. So we do find that a demand charge could be a very valuable tool to more fairly recover fixed costs while also limiting impacts to small energy users. It would be particularly aiming to recover customers with large demands. And we walked through a number of different considerations and ways you can design such a charge, whether that's monthly or annual, spread over the top demand hour or over multiple hours. But there are other considerations here where it would require much more extensive customer education, and importantly, challenges with data metering of demand. That's something that if Opalco wishes to implement a demand charge, we'll need to fix and make sure that demand can be metered correctly for all residential customers. So on the other hand, we also considered changes to the fixed customer charge, the dollar per month. And while this wouldn't distinguish between large and small users, customers are already very familiar with this type of charge. And there's other ways you can help protect low-income customers, such as increasing the EAP credit, the same as any increase to the fixed charge. But we can get into some more nuances in the next slide. Here we're starting to map out what an illustrative timeline could look like for updating the residential class. And this timeline goes from starting January 2026 over the next several years out through, around 2029 or so, with the idea that OPALCO can gradually shift towards cost allocations, aligned with the new COSA, but it doesn't need to happen immediately. So, first starting with 2026, these are some near-term changes to consider. The first might be increasing the fixed charge, and we find under the COSA that better aligning with, the full cost associated with customer-related charges would result, increasing the fixed charge from around $60 today towards around $80. But that, again, can be phased in over time, doesn't need to be an immediate, jump in 2026. And, important to emphasize again that any amount that the fixed charge is increased, you can increase the EAP credit, by that same amount. Something that we've been talking through with staff that we think is an interesting and very, helpful idea could be splitting the fixed charge into 4 clear categories. And this can really help with, communicating and having transparent charges for customers. So customers know exactly, what they're paying for in this fixed charge. And some example categories that we had presented last time, might be costs associated with capital equipment, operations and maintenance, customer service and billing, administrative and business expenses. This is just a way to, break down that fixed charge into more transparent components. But yeah, also really important to mention is that, if you do increase the fixed charge, that does involve also simultaneously reducing the volumetric charge, because you're really you're shifting the cost recovery, towards the customer charge to collect fixed costs, but at the same time you'd be, offsetting the volumetric charge. So the amount that would be reduced, of course, is commensurate with how much a fixed charge would be increased. So we mentioned on the demand, charge side, it's, in order to even consider really implementing a demand charge, you need to make sure that, any demand metering issues are resolved. So I know the team is working on, resolving those as soon as possible. And at the same time, with those getting resolved, you can begin reporting those, on customer bills, so customers can get, familiar with what their levels of demand actually are, because, that's, many customers might not be fully aware of what their demand levels are.
I think this is a good idea to move the demand charge out to some 27, 28 or whatever. Let's see what happens with the commercial first. So I think it's a good idea. And of course, this is the majority of our members. My thinking is that if we're going to have a demand charge in the future, I wonder if we should hold on the increasing the fixed charge and just wait till we get a demand charge. I'm really concerned about, again, people with really small usage getting hit with another $20 a month.
Sure, and I can speak to that also a little bit in the last bullet we have here in 2026. Another idea that, staff has been considering is a potential large service charge, and this would be, basically very similar to a fixed charge, but applied to larger customers. And we have some considerations on the next slide that we'll go to that we want to walk through some pros and cons with that. But this is, this could potentially be in lieu of increasing the fixed charge or some combination of that, where you are assigning a monthly charge for, could be $15 or $20, or you can think through what that charge would look like, but that would be applied towards customers with 400 amp or 600 amp service, which are only about 5% of the residential customers.
I do think we need to come up with a name for that charge that doesn't lead you to read it the wrong way. This is a charge for large services, not a large service charge.
Yes.
Right.
We're so lucky to have Mark here.
Well, it's one of these things, like as soon as you get out the barn door with the wrong interpretation on that one, it's a bad thing.
Yes, we can definitely make sure to clarify that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and there's also note we were talking about a pretty big difference that we want to implement and phase in over time. And one of the discussions we had is maybe ratchet up the residential over a 6-year period, like 1% per year that equals the 6% differential. So it's not, well, it's not going to be that impactful as we roll it out if we phase it.
Yeah, thanks, Foster. Yeah,
I-
definitely some.
This is Wendy, and I just wanted, since we were talking about solar on EVs, I wanted to kind of bring up the solar thing, because when we got into the rate study, one of our concerns was around, because our base charge doesn't really fully cover those costs, that then the solar, as more and more people have solar, then the burden is moving of power charges is moving more and more to lower income people and people without solar. And I don't know whether it will be possible, since we're sort of blue sky right here, to considering agnostic pricing for solar customers. So if you're going to have a 400 amp different base charge and a 600 amp different base charge, maybe we have a different base charge for solar customers. And then what we do is, one thing that they all complain about, and I have solar, but that everyone has trouble wrapping their head around, is why they don't get paid the same amount for the solar that's going to the grid as the solar they're taking from the grid. To give them a realistic base charge of what it really is, and then make the pricing on the kilowatt hours going to the grid and coming from the grid equal.
Those are real. When we went through a whole solar rate process, Wendy, that I probably need to kind of catch up with. That's a big number, by the way. If you went right to the impacts for the solar grid, it would be in the over $100, and I think that would be a big rate shock. That's the reason that we ended up with the kind of the grid charge and then the credit that went along with it. But maybe we need to have that discussion as at the tail end of this rate process. How's that?
That's again another reason for the demand charge, because in the winter when they're not doing solar and they're having a big hit in the winter time, the demand charge will take care of that, I think.
Yeah, those are good comments, Wendy. And we don't cover some of those points in this presentation, but we have been discussing those with the team, and some potential changes that we had discussed considering were, one, updating the credit that solar customers receive under the net billing, the newer renewables rates with the net billing structure. They do receive a lower credit than the retail rates, but it could be the actual cost is aligned with their solar generation might be even lower than that. So the credit could be potentially lowered, and also ensuring that customers can't use that credit to also offset their fixed costs from the customer credit, from the monthly customer charge. Might be another thing to consider. So there's definitely a lot of items to get into there.
Yeah, why don't we do a follow-up for a solar rate? How's that, Paul? Ari, maybe that'd be a good little extra item that we could explore.
And Paul, I'm new on the board, so everybody else here, their eyes all glazed over because I know they did this, and I just realized I put my foot in it because I didn't know what they did.
No, I appreciate that.
This is if I could just jump in here quickly. This is Arnie from E3. I do think it's important to think about solar even as you're designing the standard residential rate. And the question is whether you think you would want to and could get away with having a separate rate, any kind of separate charge at all that applies just to solar customers. That's been a real hot button issue in other places. So if you think that you can't or don't want to have a separate charge just for solar customers, then it becomes really important to design the base residential rate to ensure that even solar customers you're recovering a fair share of the fixed costs from the solar customers through that standard rate.
Yeah, the way it works right now, Arnie, is we did a solar analysis, and we basically had two components added to the rate structure. There was an extra grid charge because the solar people were not helping for the grid as much as they needed to. That was one of the components. Then the other one was a credit that Wendy referred to and it's different than the retail rate, because when you buy power, we buy it from Bonneville at 4 cents and sell it for 13 plus to cover those those additional fixed costs. And that was part of the analysis that we did before, but it would be a good thing to refresh that conversation so everyone's on the same page.
Great. Maybe we can get back into the timeline. There's, the last bullet or the second to last bullet here on 2026, which we haven't yet covered, points out another idea of an electric charge adjuster. And this would be similar to the current power cost adjuster, but modified to ensure, full revenue collection, accounting for both the margin and unforeseen emergencies. And this is an idea that would really be in place to ensure that Opalco can recover, revenue and ensure the financial health of the utility. So this is something that could be, would show up either as a credit or a charge, depending on how the revenues align with the costs that the utility is facing.
For a little backstory on it, we want to make sure that we have the equity. So when we go through future submarine cable replacements, remember we got 25 submarine cables without the Bonneville cables on our horizon, and they're at differing levels of useful life, and we need to really start planning for that replacement. Having the assured equity in our rate structure allows us to plan and make sure that we can manage those cable replacements as we're budgeting. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Foster. I can go, quickly through some of these, more, medium-term steps and then also get into some more of the more nuances on the service charge. But yes, in 2027 to 2028, this could be a time when, you could consider implementing a demand charge, if the metering issues are resolved. If there is a service charge put in place, the demand charge could potentially be phased in and replace that service charge. You could also consider, potential changes to the customer charge. If that is increased in 2026 and then you implement the demand charge, you could even think about decreasing the customer charge again, as you shift costs towards the demand charge. At this point, it also would be valuable to start considering Opalco's marginal costs. So we've mentioned before that the study that we've done this year is really an embedded cost of service study, looking at ways to recover Opalco's existing costs associated with existing infrastructure. But in terms of looking at incremental costs of serving new load and potential time variation in rates depending on updated BPA contracts, this could be a good time to start developing marginal costs and even hourly voided costs. And these can help inform and help evaluate a TOU rate design that may or may not be appropriate to implement. And that would lead into 2029. At that point, you could be evaluating both the demand charge success as well as potentially piloting a TOU rate if it's appropriate. But returning more to the the near term and the service charge. If you go to the next slide, Russell, we just really wanted to walk through in a bit more detail E3's assessment of some of the pros and cons of considering this. So again, what this charge would look like would be a monthly charge for customers with greater than or 400 or greater amp service. And again, this is really only 5% of the customers, about 95% are on 200 amp service. And this, again, could be just a temporary step on the path towards a demand charge. And what this service charge would be, effectively the intent would be to serve as a proxy for a demand charge. And there's different reasons you could implement a service charge, and one could be reflecting, the costs of the actual cost of installing service. But this is something that customers already pay, directly when the service is installed. So really in the near term, it would be a proxy for a demand charge. If this service charge is, though, maintained over a longer period, there are other costs associated with these larger services, including, ongoing costs of, replacing transformers over time and costs like that. So if it is a longer term charge, then it would be important for Opalco to assess those costs too. But in terms of, the pros of this type of approach, it would be easy for Opalco to implement. Opalco knows, every customer's service charge. It's quite simple to explain, and really it's pretty similar to a customer charge. And we've heard from staff that there is, pretty strong support for this type of charge, from membership. But in terms of, some other cons to consider, again, this is only a fairly small share of customers, so it wouldn't result in, it would not collect, substantial revenue for Opalco. We'd mentioned that this could be a proxy for demand, but really it's hard to tell based on existing data. The existing data we have on residential demand and service size is very limited, only a small subset of the customers. And with that data, it doesn't necessarily show a strong correlation, or does not show a strong correlation between service size and demand. But the data is just too limited, and an additional analysis would be needed to assess correlation once that becomes available. And then one final item to consider would be just the risk of introducing a new charge now and then changing the charge again a year or two later with a demand charge. That's a lot to introduce to customers, and could cause some confusion. So those are just some different things to consider if wanting to move ahead with the service charge.
One thing that I thought about is, and I agree what you're saying, it is pretty small, but one idea might be is that as we start moving the demand charge, maybe they're the first ones to get the meters to have the demand charge.
Yeah.
They would be the first ones to put on the demand charge.
Yes, I agree. That's an interesting idea.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Yeah, I guess again, it would be important to assess whether there is that strong correlation between service size and demand. So it would be important to also be able to meter demand on the 200 amp customers to really confirm that it is the larger, or determine if it is the larger service customers that are associated with larger demand.
Right, and you'll know that when we have the data over time, and
Right.
the demand charge could be a lower number until we figure out what's going on. But so anyway, I think you'd learn by having that data.
Yeah, and with the data we had looked at, I think the 400 amp service on average, again, this is limited customer data, but it was around 17 kilowatts or so. So if you think of a very small demand charge of $1 per kilowatt, then that could be around in the $17 per month range or something like that. But yeah, again, I think we feel that it would be important to get this demand metering issue resolved to more fully assess it.
I think that's a good idea, Brian. Let us kick that thought around a little bit too.
Great. Oh, I think we can move on to the next slide. So this is, yeah, again, going back to Foster's point earlier around phasing in cost changes over upwards of potentially 6 years. We just wanted to emphasize that really clearly. We had pointed out a 6% increase in residential and a pretty dramatic increase in the small and large commercial cost allocations. But you could think of potentially just a 1 to 2% increase in residential costs rather than that 6%. And I think this would be on top of the Opalco's standard 6% increase. So it would really translate to a 7 to 8% increase. But in terms of these cost changes and cost allocations, yeah, they can certainly be phased in over 3 to 6 years to avoid any rate shock. And this is again, as we lead into the commercial analysis, we do find fairly dramatic decreases in the small and large commercial classes. So again, wanted to highlight that finding, driven in large by, in part by, decreases in the commercial demand contributions since 2018. So we can go to the next slide. So we have a few slides on the commercial class rate, and so what this slide is showing are updated rates based on the COSA, comparing the 2024 tariff to what it might look like under what a combined rate might look like under with the new COSA, as well as even what a full cost based a rate might look like. So in terms of combining the rate, a benefit of this approach would be to simplify the rate. It would only be one commercial rate class rather than two. And while we find that the rate decreases for both small and large, a combined rate would result in a rate falling between the small and large commercial rates. So it would be even lower for the small commercial and higher for the large commercial. And so you can see that in the table on the bottom. We have the 2024 tariff listed for the small and large customers. And in all cases, combining the classes does decrease the rate for the commercial class. And we also wanted to show here as a comparison, what it actually looked like under the COSA. And yeah, to be clear, that not something we're recommending, but it's interesting to just have a side-by-side comparison. Whereas if you actually looked directly at the COSA cost allocation, the customer charge could be upwards of around $108 per month, with a more sizable demand charge around $12 or $13 and a much smaller volumetric. But that's again not something we're recommending, but just to show as a comparison of what the cost drivers look like. But I think the next slide helps illustrate the impacts of what these commercial rate classes might look like relative to the existing tariff structure. So this is showing for small commercial on the left 2 bars and a large commercial customer on the right 2 bars. And we picked out a roughly median customer for both small and large respectively. And just wanted to highlight that first, in all cases, regardless of the different rate design selected here, the rates do decrease pretty significantly for these customers. Looking at the small commercial, just under the updated COSA alone, we see their rate in this case decrease around, or their bill decrease around 16% relative to the existing tariff. But if you combine with the large commercial, that the small commercial class benefits from even larger decreases for the large class. So that would actually benefit the small commercial customer, resulting in a bill decrease around 30% for this median customer. Looking at the large commercial, if they, those classes were to be kept separate, under the updated COSA, we find a bill decrease around 30%. And this is slightly reduced if you combine it, but down to is around 24% reduction. But again, in all cases, we do see reductions in these bills. Go to the next slide. And then we also wanted to walk through, just highlight the changes we updated with the pumps class. We did not consider any rate design changes. It would keep the existing structure. And under the updated COSA, the cost allocation does increase around 7% or so. And so the different charges are scaled appropriately. Again, this could be phased in over time, so it's not as dramatic of an increase. And something to point out on both the pumps class and I forgot to mention on the commercial class is that the same principles of splitting out the customer charge into clear categories, as well as this electric charge adjuster, can be implemented. I think we have there we go. Go up one. So to summarize here some of the key takeaways of what we've been discussing and next steps. We do think for all rates, again, important to phase in potentially over a 3 to 6 year period for a smooth transition. The fixed charge across all rates can be split into clear categories based on the findings in the COSA, and this electric charge adjuster can be implemented for all rates to make sure that the equities, planning for equity and potential big investments down the road with the underwater cables. For the residential class, the few different options here. We are recommending an increased fixed charge gradually over time with commensurate increase in the EAP credit. And then you're really starting to plan for that small demand charge in the near term. And again, this service charge for large customers is definitely another option to consider here. As the demand charge is planned for. On the commercial side, E3 doesn't really have a strong recommendation either way around combining small and large classes. Again, in all cases, both classes will be seeing reductions in bills, but there are some trade-offs with the better benefits for the small commercial class by combining slightly higher rate for the large commercial, and it would of course simplify Opalco's rate schedules. Under the pumps class, again, we have a more simple update, just aligning with the COSA. And then, lastly, on the next steps, I think the main plan, or the plan going forward, I think the staff is going to review and align on some of these proposed updates, think through what might make sense. And E3 again can come in potentially in the fall to help with the final stages of the process. But we're happy to continue discussing as much as we can, and have been really grateful to be involved in the process and want to stay involved as much as we can. So I can end there and take any questions, or if Arnie or Ari want to add any comments as well, happy to jump in.
I have a small question in terms of in an early slide, we talked about breaking out the service charge into 4 categories. And I think it would be terrific to do this, to really show people what these things cost, right? Do you have a rough estimate you're working with in terms of what percentage of the fixed charge is allocated to each of those 4 categories?
Yeah, we did have a slide in the prior
give me a moment and give me a moment and I'll try to find it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, I think customer service and billing is a small percentage and operations and maintenance is a larger percentage, right? I just wanted to see what those were.
You remember what slide that was on, Paul?
Slide 9, I believe.
There's kind of a breakout. So we wanted to whittle it down into 4 components. So the administrative and customer service, the administrative and business expense would combine together, just to simplify it a little, into 4. So it'd be 10, 24%, 34%, and 33% for the various components.
Okay. Let's talk about that later.
So as you think about we'll just call it a $50 charge, it's going to be, $5 for customer and service and billing and
right.
And I think it's nice for people to have an idea where that is, especially staff versus material.
Yeah.
And work. I think it's good for them to know that.
It's not clear to me that 4 is the right number. The 5 might be the right number, because I think we want to make sure that people understand. I mean, a lot of, anyway, never mind. I'm good for the moment.
Some of our limitation may be when we go to build print, how much can
I
fit
see.
in the space.
Yeah, that makes
We've
sense.
got to get into those components, but some of it is you put too many line items, it does get quite confusing. And so we'll debate that in a bit. Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we have the data available to, you know, slice it different ways, so we can make sure to be providing that.
Right.
Can you please go up to your slide on, see, page 7? So it's going to be an interesting conversation with the members about the residential going up and the commercial going down. And so we need to explain why. Now, I'm no experience on this. My experience was with Bonneville and not with residential stuff. But my things that I've read, that COSAs in general over the decades were designed to put more cost on the commercial to keep the residential number costs lower. And now we're basically bringing it what's more appropriate. Any thoughts about that? Because we're going to have to explain it.
So it's a little different than this. Is the shift of cost is the decline in value that's going toward our commercial and going. So we have more residences, more usage in residential, less usage and less demand in commercial, and therefore there's a cost shift, and that's the real component that's going on here.
I see. What remind me what are the this is just 1 year from 24 to 25.
This is relative to 2018, which is when the prior
That's okay.
COSA
That's
was
important.
done. Yes.
That's a little confusing then.
Well,
so
are comparing
2024 tariff was based on that 2018 COSA.
Right.
And in 2018, there was a larger commercial contingency than there is now.
And that makes sense. But I think when we explain this, where Brian's coming from with this is that it will not make sense to any, if they think large commercial went down by 30% in a year, they're
Right.
not going to find that credible. But I think it's very understandable given the shift that's happened in terms of people moving in through the pandemic, et cetera, comparing 2018 to what's happening in 2025. You can see how there would be that large a shift in the cost components over that period of time. So we just have to call that out, because this is the cumulative effect in terms of our cost allocation over a period of time.
And we may have lost some commercial business.
So if we had some,
we just didn't lose 30% of our commercial businesses.
if we had some massive industrial load come on, for instance, you would see a large shift toward that likely.
Mhm.
You know, and so, you know, I've seen that at other places where where all of a sudden the cost profile for residential shifts down.
Right, absolutely. And we just need to note that, you know, this is a cumulative thing that happened over a number of years. And in particular, it happened over a number of years where we had the highest influx, the highest increase in population in in decades.
Recent, yeah.
Right. So, and that explains it to people.
Yep. That's why we need to get it to Krista's hands fast.
Yeah. This is one of the difficult things to explain in a small number of words.
As Foster spoke earlier, you know, we're trying to, this is just the cumulative effect that we want to go to over time. We're just talking a multi-year stage to get there. Maybe a decrease in commercial for marginal decrease in commercial this year to next year.
Sure.
And then a 1% increase just for this effect toward the residential. And then there's our natural inflation of cost.
Right.
All right. Well, what our plan is to come back, you know, we're going to be doing some homework staff wise, looking at bill print, which is no easy solution for us. And then we figured right around the budget time, E3 was nice enough to give us some flexibility to look at other things as we getting closer into the budget implementation. And I'll throw in you know, maybe we'll have a discussion about solar before we get into that, maybe in the October timeframe, kind of get on the same page with those components too. And with that, I want to thank E3 for all their diligence
Excellent.
so far.
Yeah, thank you.
That's great work.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and it's been great discussing with you all.
Yep, thanks all. Glad to be of help.
Thank you much, Arnie. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Arnie and Arnie. Good job, Paul.
Okay,
Where do you want to jump?
Foster.
Yeah, why don't we did the charger,
Mm-hmm.
but why don't we go to the state of the power grid?
Right.
Page 9, take it from there. I want to make sure that we're really clear on our messaging. You know, as we're talking about renewable generation, we're talking about the status of the power grid. We're learning every day. I mean, every day there's a new report that comes out that says the Pacific Northwest power grid is having an increased likelihood of power outages that are getting more real. I think some of the think tanks are putting in some good information in their projections, and it's becoming very real. So I want to make sure that we update our board materials and do this every month and really kind of get a good picture on what's going on with the power grid. I don't know, this is just my take on it. I'd love to hear from everyone else, but I don't know, we put a whole communication effort in the board material. So I want to really see how much we communicate with our members. And it's such a challenging topic for us to talk about, the mainland power grid and how precarious it's becoming, because people don't really understand. I don't really get the fact that if we do nothing, that's an option. So I was a little bit more trying to be a little bit more clear that we really do have a lot of heavy lifting to do if we're going to keep reliability going in the future for electricity. And I think we really need to focus and concentrate on this effort a lot, going forward. About, you can't just say no. We have to figure out, based on our submarine cable limitations, so we're going to have to figure out how to build some local renewable generation and look at other different ways to keep reliability functioning. By the way, I've had a good discussion with Arnie, since I don't know if he's still here or not, about some of the studies they're doing on the mainland about whether or not the power, what's the status of the power grid, or whether or not blackouts are coming or shortfalls are present. And he's coming to one report that he's finalizing. He doesn't know the results just yet, but they're getting more precarious as we go. We're hearing that from the Northwest Power and Conservation Council and other think tanks, that it's becoming very real. Having that be absorbed by our membership is really going to be, it's always the big challenge for us. I think we're getting headway because we actually we're in the news more about Decatur, we're in the news more about Baylor Hill and why we're doing it. So I think it's starting to resonate. I would love to get your, the take on the board, Vince, if you have any thoughts about kind of communicating how precarious things are getting.
Yeah, I've got some stuff I'm going to show later on, but I think I think it's a challenge. My simple take on the whole thing is that I'm laying a lot of blame on our state government at this. If you go back starting in 1997 and 2000 and stuff like this, when they passed CETA and CCA and so on and so forth, they've been really silent about it ever since. This is the classic case where government just sets something in motion and then never bothers to find out if it's actually working or not. And there's a lot of data to support that, which I'll show later on. But right now it's it's a case of, for example, everybody says, well, they're building. There was a quote in the Orcasonian back in April or something like this, and somebody said, there's 207 gigawatts of stuff just waiting to get connected to BPA. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. Is that really true? So you can go to the BPA, and buried in the website, there's an interconnection queue spreadsheet. It's got 636 line items on it. And so you go through all that stuff, and you find out of that 207 gigawatts that's in there, like 171 of it has been stuff that's been withdrawn over time. So that 207 number comprises everything that's been requested or studied, implemented or denied since 2000. So it's 25 years of stuff that's in there. So you got people making blanket statements about how wonderful everything is without actually digging down into, is that really the case? And I believe there's a massive mismatch between what the state thinks is happening. And it isn't all of the state. For example, if you dig into some of the reports that Commerce has done, and there was a bill passed in 2023 to set up a Renewable Energy Siting Evaluation Council, which has been busy doing some work, and they released their first report. And they've summarized some really terrible things to worry about here that I don't think the legislature has read. And the last comment I want to make on this is really interesting is this morning I happened to watch the June 3rd County Council meeting that had, the first session was a discussion about the session that had just finished in legislature. It had Lekanoff and Lovelet and Rommel on it, talking with our county council. And it's really interesting because what came out of that is that there were 2,000 bills introduced in the legislature for this last session, of which about 200 of them passed. 1,800 of them died in committee or never made it to the light of day or something like this. And out of that 200 that passed, only 7 of them had anything to do with the climate or energy. So, while this had a lot of attention several years ago, it's kind of fallen by the wayside right now. And the thing they were worried about was the budget. And you'll find a little bit later on is that the Comprehensive Climate Act, it's got actually on the books now, the Ecology just released a report in April of 2025 on where's all that money going. There's $3 billion in the pocket right now for that stuff, of which only about 74 million has actually been released out of that 3 billion that's sitting there. And there's a great quote I've got from one of our representatives that says how they were really proud that with the budget constraints that they were temporarily taking some money out of CCA to go into the general fund. So this was something we worried about, which is, you put this carbon auction on and stuff like this, and you would hope that this stuff is going towards greenhouse gas reduction and the grid, and that's not happening. So I'll go on and on about that stuff, but I think the bottom line is that it is a very, very complicated story that's going on. And, we cannot ignore what is happening on the mainland and sit out here with our heads in the sand and hope that everything is going to be okay.
The other things that are interesting is my father-in-law lives down in California. They're going through blackouts, during, summertime heat events, not just the ones for wildfire, but literally just capacity. And it's really been interesting to not read anything about it. I don't know if you guys hear about that kind of stuff, but if it weren't for him letting me know, it's just a non-discussion point. And I think it's really misleading for, our whole, nation not to really understand all the trade-offs that are going on unknown. I wish we would know that, because it would probably light a fire in our understanding out here in the Pacific Northwest if we realize that.
Did you see the outage in Spain?
Yes.
And new information's coming out in the last week or so. It was not a solar problem. It was not a wind problem. It has to do with how they managed the grid, and they didn't have thermal generators standing by, knowing that they were at a very tough situation, and they weren't able to come up quickly when they needed. They need some thermal generation to fill you up when problems happen.
And that because they didn't have that, they lost frequency sync across the grid. Is that
so? What happened? It's one of those things that it just goes one bad thing over another. So as they lost generation, the frequency goes down.
Mhm.
When the frequency goes down, the nuclear plants in France all shut down. 1.2 gigawatts of nuclear shut down because they don't like to do that. The machines don't like it. They lost 1.2 kilowatts at once because they didn't have enough to fill in. So it was frequency and voltage, but it's not because the wind was blowing and the solar was going, but there were just other problems on the grid.
That's a good case study for us to use.
Yeah, it'll probably be another year before they have a full study, but they're at least starting to do some things now of how they operate their system. It's basically the control people that made the screw up.
If you want to apply that here, natural gas is a great transitionary resource, but having that in the wings when you need it is really essential. And it's not encouraged from an investment perspective, right? Because you're not really using it as much as you would want. So no one's building any natural gas plants for the last decade. And that's kind of the situation that we're running into here, is that we're going to reach those big usage timeframes during cold and heat events. And boy, are we going to be short.
Right. And actually about 10 years ago, E3 did a study as Washington was making this decisions here. And if you want to go, say, to 90% clean, there's a cost, but you can do it. Go to 95%, the cost to do that doubles.
Right.
You go to 99% and it's ridiculous, and you're going to have outages like this.
Right.
I think that Washington's going to have, and Oregon and California are going to have to make changes to allow some amount of thermal to keep the lights on.
Right.
Brian,
it saves money and it keeps the lights on.
And without those changes to CETA and the Oregon version of that, it's not investable.
Yeah, that's so true, and that's proven. But you dig down into the data, and out of that 207 gigawatts of stuff that was in the Bonneville Energy, 17,000 megawatts of that are canceled natural gas plants over various years like this, where they just decided to stop going on it. Foster mentions down there's this really interesting thing going, the Centralia coal plant, the last coal plant in Washington, shuts down December 31st, 2025. And that's an agreement between Washington State and the owners of that. And that was done 11 years ago. So this is not going to be a case where the Trump administration is going to come in and say, keep the plant open. They've got no authority over that particular thing. So that's going to disappear. And everybody says, well, wind and solar take care of it. Well, if you dig into it, you look through what's in the EFSEC pipeline for permitting, and you say, well, where is all this stuff? So it turns out that that plant that's shutting down, the latest data had about 4 terawatt hours worth of stuff generation, in 2024, 2023, like that. That goes away, and what's going to replace it is one 200 megawatt solar plant, which is going to come online in December. So it's something like about 100 megawatt hours is going to replace the 4 terawatt hours. And that's getting no publicity whatsoever. And that's all there is. There is not anything else coming online in 2026 to replace that. So we get a repeat of 2024, and, it looks marginal again.
I think another thing, when you look at the Bonneville queue, people generation who want transmission, as you say, about half of them just were removed. But there's also a lot of them that are in them, the other half. Some of them have been in the queue for 40 years.
Right.
They just didn't take them out.
Yep.
They're not, and it's not because Bonneville can't provide transmission. They're not doing as much as we need, but they just want to sit there.
Yeah.
So the other half, the half that's still in there is not real.
Yeah. Many of it is speculative. They put it in, we're not going to, there was no commitment to actually even get the funding to do the thing until they could get far enough along in the study to say there was a certainty that they could get some transmission connection to it. So many of the ones that are still in the study thing will disappear over time too. So, and there's some good slides I can show later on, which is the Northwest Power and Conservation Council is working on the 9th power plan, and they're regularly on their things are starting to look at various elements. In the May meeting, they've got a nice slide set about what the demand looks like and it's huge. It's, it's everything we've been saying. They're looking at peaks more than twice and averages of 78% over time. And the question is, well, where is the generation going to come to provide all that stuff? And you hear the mantra of conservation, efficiency, and rooftop solar. And when you dig into the CEIP plans that are coming out, you can go to the Department of Commerce. I've got a website where they've got all that. Add it all up, and over the next 10 years, of about 19,000 megawatts of renewable energy that they're looking for, 18,800 of it is new renewable generation. Energy efficiency is 560 megawatt hours and demand response is 300 megawatts. So those collectively come up to about 3.4%. So, this mythology that these other things are going to make it unnecessary for it to build new generation is not supported by the data on the ground. And we're being accused of scaring people. Well, maybe the truth is scary.
Yeah, I want to add one thing to it. Also, even in a short-term perspective, you're like, okay, so maybe what you do is you bring in power from other areas like Idaho that don't have the CETA requirements and CCA things, but there's no transmission. So even the options to keep the power on the west side, we just don't see it. There's the transmission is probably just as challenging as getting, probably even more challenging than getting a renewable project off the ground.
Yeah.
I don't know, the stats that we had last time we talked about Puget Sound Energy, it was years ago. And I think Brian gave us a contact. It was with a person over there in their transmission side. And they're probably double the prices now, but it was like $5 million a mile. And it took you 10 years to try to get the transmission through a residential, denser area. And you have no probability of success.
Again, that's supported by the data. If you look at the CEIPs that the two biggest IOUs, so Puget Sound Energy and Avista, collectively they're looking between 6,000 and 8,000 megawatts renewable energy. They're not planning to build it. They're putting out RFPs to buy it from the market. Well, the market is the ones that have to go to EFSEC and get the permitting and the building for all this stuff, and it isn't there. So, it is the question, well, where is this power going to come from?
Yeah, and then the legal challenges, even if you do get through FSEC, aren't stopped either.
Yeah, yeah. And you go on and on and on. I mean, there's data after data after data that says we're not in a good position, boys and girls. And that is only now where you're starting to see it, that I think there was a spate of articles in the May, June timeframe, Seattle Times, ProPublica, others, things like demand for electricity will soon surge past our region's ability to deliver it. ProPublica had a series about higher prices, rolling blackouts, and Northwest is bracing for the effects of a lagging green energy push. Northwest grid nears breaking point. So this was, I think, triggered by NERC, I think, putting out the report looking at the 2024 fourth quarter reliability forecast for the US or so. And I'm not sure who the reporters are that started pushing this stuff, but it's like, we've been saying this for years, and now it's all of a sudden the mass media is kind of waking up and something like that. But this message is not sinking into the public at all.
It really isn't. I'm kind of looking at the process that we're going through locally, and I think our message is starting to get out there. I feel a little bit better about it. Let's go down to the status of our local renewable projects that we have going on. I think we understand kind of the dilemmas that we have. Just also remember, we also have those two submarine cables. One of them is 41 years old with a useful lifespan of expected 40 to 60 years. So we're already in that zone. And then the other one is 25 years old, but I think that useful life on that second composite cable is a little bit less. And so we're in dire need to replace the submarine cable, at least one, and have a plan for the other one. What do we do in the interim? It's that really short-term nature that we're going to be struggling with. So we got, let me give you a quick little update on what's going on over on Decatur. Remember, we were trying to expand the solar portion of the Decatur grid that we have over there now. We've we started our overall design and trying to work with the county, trying to get that low income solar grant off the ground. Then what we did is we're going dual courses. One looking at a 3-acre lease of a county parcel, and then the other one is a property owner that we managed to acquire adjacent parcel right next door to our substation. That's been perfect location in terms of the Decatur site. Right now we're listening to the Decatur residents. We've had some good material that was discussed back and forth. We've met with different people, had town halls over on Decatur. What we agreed to do is really have a central location on our website and provide all the transparent information that you would expect to see when we go through a building permit. And we're dedicated to put all the reports, wetland studies, and everything on our Decatur website. There's the link to it right there. We're at the beginning stages of that. So the first thing you do is you do your wetland study, so you can come up with your site plans. And with with the wetland study, where you can build the solar and avoid the wetland and the setback areas. And then it goes from there. So we're compiling that information as we speak, getting some good information on the website, so people really understand what we're doing down over on Decatur. Remember, what we're planning on doing is, everybody, all the different islands, in our service territory are scheduled to grow in electricity demand and population and so forth. And what we're proposing over on Decatur is just figure out what their load growth is going to be in the next 10 years and really start planning for that. Why Decatur? I mean, those are really good questions that are coming up. From a cooperative in total perspective, you remember Decatur is the last island that we have before we hit the mainland. And it's a small enough area and their usage is fairly small for us to really understand the mechanics and how to logistically deal with the grid, the microgrid components. It's not as easy as you think when you have a battery and a solar grid with different sine waves and trying to keep the power up and running. And I think the lessons learned that we're still acquiring with that grid are really meaningful, very valuable for us to figure out how to navigate through renewable generation when a cloud goes by and so forth. And having that as a pilot is one of the big advantages. But we're not overburdening Decatur with something more than they would need normally on their load growth profile. So it makes sense on the surface for Opalco, but we really do need to get into the details and be very sensitive to the Decatur residents and really listen to what their hesitancy of expanding our solar site over there. But we're in the process of doing that. Any questions or anything you want to add, Tom?
Sure. There is significant concern, pretty well-defined opposition to the project on Decatur. A lot of community interaction. There's been several groups that have prepared information. And so, the out of the gate reaction was, quite negative and pretty significant pushback and a number of pretty legitimate areas of concern that are environmentally justified as concerns. So over surface runoff, the stormwater side of it, tree removal, and the aesthetics. So I think the good part of the process is a lot of the really specific concerns, design attribute issues, and kind of public opinion has been consolidated and fed back to Opalco, which is great. Now we're in the phase, as Foster mentioned, of studying all that, completing sub-consultant reports, and having a tighter design set of attributes ready to present back to the community. But I just want to let you know that the general community viewpoint on this now, with what they know now and the shape of the scope, is pretty negative and high levels of concern.
We also did put there was a couple pieces of correspondence that people wanted to inform the board, and I think you guys have already read them. They're in the appendix.
I should state as well that this is not going to be just unique to the Decatur site experience. It's anywhere we choose to do something like this throughout the county.
Right.
We're going to face those similar issues, right? From a pre-permitting perspective, community impact perspective, and kind of evaluation of the trade-offs. So going through this process, getting better at it, and particularly the community engagement part of this, I think is a good learning experience, and will just result in improvements, process improvements.
Yeah, I
It's
think
painful now, but it's going to help, for other projects as we go forward.
thanks for that, Tom. I would reiterate the same thing. We're learning a lot on how to roll out really complex projects. Our team has been, we're a good caring team, and I think listening to people and having it translates to how we package information and communicate it is essential. I think the concept that we have, and this is what we're trying to prove up and provide the reports and give a recap to the community at a later date. But it really needs to be, we need to consider Decatur Solar like the model microgrid. And what that really translates is, how do we weave in all the important aspects of our community together, environmental, wetland, stormwater, solar panels, so we can really make sure that we can get the renewable generation to cover our load growth, because it's going to be required, and then figure out the reliability aspects, but also really incorporate it into our very sensitive environment. And that's going to, that's why we want to do such a great job on Decatur. And I think we can. What we got to do is really go through the process, prove it up, and really have a good interaction with Decatur folks. Any questions on Decatur? Stay tuned there. Okay, so Baylor Hill, we're really going to be focusing on Decatur right now. Baylor Hill is we realized that there was a permitting challenge that we needed to continue on with. Now we're going to focus on whether we're going to go forward with Decatur, all the project attributes, all the permitting side. And then we'll tee up Decatur and bring it back to the board at a later date for discussion and go ahead. The Baylor Hill, we're just going to wait. It's really on hold. Same concept though, a little different, where Decatur is more of a incorporate your microgrid into a more remote, island environment, where Baylor Hill is more of the ag side. So the concept that we have at Baylor Hill is really coming up with a model agri-solar situation where we could actually get some agricultural incorporated in with our project with solar. There's been some really great research, a lot of study done by some think tanks about the benefits of agri-solar. And as we wrap up or conclude Decatur, then we'll transition back over to Baylor Hill and really work together with the ag community, with ARC, and come up with another model community that we could showcase, if you will, all the wonderful things that we could do if we're really working together for agri-solar, and then use that as the model to really communicate to the rest of our members that this is what we can create. And then we can ask our membership, is this something that we're going to be in favor for, to avoid, blackouts and rolling blackouts and the things that we just talked about. Any questions on Baylor Hill?
Yes, Foster. I'd like to throw out one question here. Have you really considered if the outcome, if we really get continued strong objection to both of these projects, where we will stand at that point?
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to come back to the board with the pros and cons. We're going to outline before and after, and really have a clear understanding of the benefits to the co-op, the impacts to the co-op as well as the interactions and support or non-support of the members, and then kind of see where we are. And then at that stage, it's going to be is this something that we and the board want to go forward with or not? But we have to do all of the permitting, in Decatur, we have to do all the permit before we're able to package that in a format that you see all the trade-offs that we're planning for on Decatur. I mean, coming up with renewable generation does have trade-offs. And I think that's what we're compiling right now, and we're going to be doing a really good job outlining that stuff and coming back to the board at a later date with those trade-offs to make that decision.
Okay, I'm not sure that you really answered my question here, and this is a concern that neither of these projects are going to go ahead for whatever the major reason is. How bad a position are we in at that point?
You
Bearing
mean
in mind that, we've always said that the solar is not the answer to our grid problems because we're a winter peaking at night when there's no solar generation. That's our biggest concern as far as being able to provide enough power or avoid blackouts.
I don't know if that's accurate, what you just said. In the summertime, we get a tremendous amount of sun. So if there's an outage in the summertime, we're able to adapt. We'll be able to use the solar to our advantage. You're right in the fact that in the wintertime, we need batteries, and batteries are going to be the solution. So
there you go. That's what I wanted to hear from you. And I think that is, we need to include that more than we have been in the past, because that's going to make a difference if we can balance things better with batteries and keep solar generation going.
Yeah, I mean, solar has some tremendous value. I mean, Wendy's got a good solar array going in the summertime. It's extremely valuable. And if we end up in a situation where we don't have power coming from the mainland because of a heat, sensitive, time frame, we're going to be very fortunate. It's batteries are really expensive though, and we have one right now. What we need to do is figure out how to embrace more. But boy, we're a kind of a little co-op financially. We're not the Bank of Opalco. We don't have the resources to buy a tremendous amount of batteries. We really do need to get assistance from the government because this has been like Vince just outlined, this is a governmental situation that's out there, and we need help and support through grants. So we're never going to give up on the battery technologies. We're going to come up with different innovative ways to provide our members with the ability to incorporate batteries is what our plan is. If we can get some additional RUS, those RES funds, our Switch It Up program. So we have some programs that have been really successful to switch it up. And if we can look at everything, the way I look at it is that there's no silver bullet. It's not just batteries. It's not just batteries on the utility scale. It could be member batteries. It could be incorporating more renewable generation where we can for community-based projects. Or maybe we need to look at some other kind of emergency generation at our substations. So we're going to be, what I think one of our goals is going to be updating our IRP with some with a slant towards probably reliability, if you will.
So I'm going to push back a little bit on the value in the summertime. I mean, yes, it can help us because the cost of energy is coming up in the summertime in the West. So that will help us. And I agree with that. But we don't have outages in the summertime. It's been very rare. And if it happens, so what? People are not going to die because they'll be cold. Don't open your refrigerator, and if the power's off for a day, I don't think it's a big deal. To me, the winter is the big issue that we need to protect our members.
Let's see, what I'm curious on is if climate change impacts California is a lot hotter, there's no question about it. But it's not going to surprise me, Brian, that the grid gets precarious, and even during heat waves that we have here, it's going to be a different dilemma. Remember, the ice pack that we have in our hydro system is going to be melting a lot sooner. What happens at the end of the summer when there's just no water? I mean, I don't think that you could rely on the fact that we don't have a problem in the summertime. Maybe it's less impactful and people aren't going to, die because because it's going to be cold, overly cold, and people actually need that warmth. But don't discount what's going to happen in the summertime in the future. I think we don't even know yet, and I think having generation in the summertime, I think is going to be a big advantage to us to fill our batteries. And if we have a longer term event, like a Cascadia or something that's more impactful, then having some power up and running in the summertime is going to be helpful. I don't.
Yeah, and also note that a lot of the water in the late summer and going on into September is all going to California, not here.
Well, I think that's I mean, when you look at the numbers that we're talking about, and they're kind of dire. I mean, and then you actually look to see if there's an approach to embrace a transitionary resource like natural gas. In the state of Washington, the answer is really none. I mean, it's really discouraged, it's penalized. I think that things are going to change once we experience some blackouts, and then I think people are going to be more open to, different solutions. But it's going to be we're going to have to be dynamic. I guess the conclusion that I reach is don't really focus on the solar. We need everything, right?
Absolutely.
We need as many batteries as we can get. I mean, if we could use our Switch It Up program to help our members embrace batteries so we could have a solution for individuals as well as Opalco, and maybe we could do some vehicle to grid stuff and utilize some of the cars if we could monetize it. But I don't want to focus on just the renewable side. There are advantages, but batteries are overwhelmingly what we're going to be required to look at for the wintertime for sure.
Let me jump in with an opinion here. We've been working for 6 months with the county on the comprehensive plan, and I've come to the conclusion of the following. We got 3 problems we're trying to deal with here. My goal was, it would be really nice if this place had reliable, affordable power capable of supporting the projected population growth and the climate change stuff we're facing going forward. So it'd be really nice if that would happen. We got 3 issues related to that. We got technology issues, and that has to do with, as we go forward, what would be the appropriate generation sources and storage technologies that were going to be available to us to use in what time frame. So that's one. Second is the economics. We can't afford it. We got to either replace a cable or get another cable at some point in time. And going with that. And the third thing is the cultural aspect. And that has to do with, we've got to work with the county to bring everybody along to an understanding that we really do need to do some stuff. And so, that's sort of what I'm wrestling with in my mind, is those balance between those three aspects of this.
Yeah, and I just want to add to something Vince was saying, because we always talk about how having the solar, and in particular the batteries, will help us to delay how long the timing of when we would need another submarine cable to the mainland, because it's such a huge step change in cost. And I know that in sort of philosophically, but I don't know what it really means in terms of in what year would we think we would need to replace the cable, if we had a certain amount of batteries and had a certain amount of local generation versus if we didn't, to kind of be able to say something about that, because the cost of that cable is so huge that I feel like being able to talk about that on an economic basis would really carry a lot of weight with a number of our members.
Yeah, and we're by the way, I could give an update on the cable. We're just starting. What we did is we tried to use the grant time to, I think we submitted 3 applications for a submarine cable, Wendy, and they were discouraged and we didn't move forward with them. And I think some of the rationale that I'm hearing back is it's a Bonneville, those are 2 Bonneville cables. They should be the one that are asking for the funds. They're the ones that are responsible for providing the electric service. So we're basically saying, okay, Bonneville, we're going through that overall process right now of figuring out the status of the cable. We've asked them for ROV flyovers to see the condition of the cables and so forth. So we have a clear understanding of what we're looking at, because I'm very concerned. I mean, we have a 40-year-old cable that's out there, a 41-year-old cable, and we're right at the end of the useful life of it. Yeah, we're absolutely concerned. Working with Bonneville is going to be, tough right now. I mean, most of their transmission group have already departed. They're part of that whole federal issue of I don't know, dysfunction. So we're not seeing a lot of people left to have conversations, but we're struggling a little bit. But
Yeah, the head of the transmission took the payout.
yeah, I think there's nobody left in your old arena, Brian. I don't. Brian Altman's gone, and everyone else is in that same category.
Right.
So we have to re-educate people and bring it along. We have PNGC to help us with that. So I don't want to act like it's doom and gloom. It's just going to take longer than we think. And remember, we got 2 cables, so let's not panic. What we like to do is we like to have both of those cables run our island service territory individually. So if one of them got dragged by a barge anchor or whatever, that we'd have the other one to rely on. We're exceeding the capabilities of the 25-year-old cable, and then the other one's getting old. So that's the problem that we're seeing. We can still manage with both of those cables. We're just losing the capacity of if one went out of service.
Right.
If the 41-year-old cable ran out of service during large events like a weather event in the wintertime, that's where the cable would be at capacity or approaching that capacity.
Follow up on that. Some good points. One is the N+1 redundancy, like you just said. So if we have one cable down, can we operate on the other? So that's the redundancy argument. And the second is worst case winter peak load and stress on the cables and impact of remaining alive. It'd be nice to see the math on what those worst case peaks look like or what they've been historically. And if some amount of kWh of battery capacity would allow us to do some peak shaving, if that's even possible, then, is the investment in the battery implementation something we could do cheaper and faster to then take some pressure off the cables for peak shaving? And is it even viable? In other words, is it a peak for a week in the winter, the extreme weather event, cold snap, or is it a peak for 3 or 4 hours in one day in the winter? What kind of stored energy reserve would be needed to take some peak pressure off the cables? And is that a good trade-off or a good investment to help, prolong the life of the cables? Back to the heater situation, is there a environmentally responsible way to implement more storage there that then helps take a little pressure off this issue?
Great questions. Thanks for your wisdom, Tom. I know there was, when we originally got the battery, we had PNNL do an analysis. It was you remember the 10 use cases. I think it's on our website. And looking at, just like you said, what can we do? The most value that we actually had from the cable wasn't reliability. It was all about safeguarding, trying to minimize the heat on those submarine cables, over time. And that's how we've been managing the battery to date. Is what we do is we, it discharges during our peak times in the morning and in the evening. And then, running different scenarios. It's not all about that, but there was, I think, 10 different use cases that we were looking at, but that was overwhelmingly the largest financial benefit for the battery.
I would recommend, this is really good. I had asked Russell a question the other day, and he's got a fabulous explanation about basically from all the way from Cedro Woolley to here, what are the limitations, what equipment is in there, the whole thing. It isn't just our cables. There's a number of other potential bottlenecks within that whole transmission system here that is going to bear into how we're going to have to deal with the winter peaks. And when you start looking forward, the load forecast, with the using the population growth that the counties commanded, more EVs, more switch it up, moving over to stuff. If and when the ferries ever come in here, that's a 15 megawatt for 15 minutes of 40 times a day. It's going to add 72,000 megawatt hours to the load or soul. So, since it's going to take 10 to 15 years to get anything done, I think a good understanding of what that whole mess looks like is worthwhile at some point in time. And Russ has got a great explanation on that.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to touch on it. What we do is we have our connection through Burroughs Bay, and there's limitations on our transmission agreement from Bonneville has on our behalf through PSE, and it's at 100 level. So we got multiple. You got a cable that has 100 megawatt capacity. Same thing with this stretch that goes to Burroughs Bay, and all total, I think that's what has us nervous because we're starting to tickle that threshold. Russell, do you want to add anything to it?
Sure. So BPA gives us a a seasonal rating factor for all the devices for the single feed for us. So we started that substation that's just near the Anacortes Airport, and there's the lowest rated item is the overhead lines that we all drive by as we leave on the ferry, and that's at 97 megawatts. So it's even under the contractual rating with PSE. So we do have pressure on BPA in the discussions with our submarine cable, because there's some components within to include that submarine cable that can't quite reach the full rating as needed. Now let's be mindful, heat load on oil field cables is not actually a concern because the heat dissipation factor on oil field cables. So the older cables that we have, mind you, we have those too, and BPA has, you can push those right up to that steady state rating of that old oil field cables, 150 megawatts. But the 69 kV cable, the newer one that was put in 2000, is an XLPE cable or a solid dielectric cable, which
meaning
has a heat rating.
Meaning it's plastic.
Yeah. Yes. So, anyway, there's limitations under normal load characteristics. We do split our load, so it's Decatur, Blakely, and a portion of Orcas on one feed that comes from that 69 kV cable, and then there's Shaw and the rest of Orcas also on that cable. The other cable houses Lopez and San Juan, and that brings us down to roughly half of our load on each during normal conditions. We have had conditions where there was a failure of a breaker on Lopez, or a tree down in the 69 line where we are pushing on one or the other cable, which does create that N-1 risk. But the biggest problem there is, what does it look like in that February, January, December day where we're pushing 82 to 85 megawatts, which in an MVA rating, we can assume that's much higher, and closing in on that 100 MVA rating of the cable, and more importantly the PSE line, because that's where our limitation is at 97 MVA. And having said that, it's you're exactly right. What is that duration? Because that 97 rating is a steady state rating, not an emergency rating. So you can go up to sometimes up to 40% above that, depending on the air conditions. Ambient air conditions mean a lot. So if it's very cold, you can push it a little harder. But mind you, we had that instance 2 years ago where we melted some jumpers, and that was just poor connections that created heat. And then it gave way 2 nights in a row because of a poor remediation from PSE. I think we can state that publicly now.
So,
and so when we get into our day, our nighttime in the winter, it does slow down a little bit. We get in that, in those days, we get into that between 60 and 70 megawatts total system. And then in that morning, that's when we really start pushing, and there's not as much of a differential. You get back to that 85. The morning is our winter peak. Our system has changed in the summer. We are now a evening peak in the summer as of 3 years ago. But that morning peak is the first peak. And then it just depends on how that weather event rides out for the rest of the day. Normally a nor'easter that's pushing toward us, and that can carry through the whole day with a marginal decrease, meaning maybe 7 megawatts of decrease for the midday into the evening, and you push another peak there because that's when people cook and do all these various things in their home. Maybe they're not working, they're
Right.
at home.
But they're
So
heating all day.
they're heating all day. And then at night, because you turn off lights, you start conserving your loads. You're not, I don't know what people watching television or doing various things around the home. You're sleeping, you're not active. So it does decrease a good bit. So it gets back to, like I said, around 65 maybe megawatts during the evenings. And then it's how long does that sustain? We've had some events that sustain for longer. Mind you, we're normally running on 2 cables, but BPA does promise that N-1 scenario with our contract, and that's not the scenario they have with PSE. We just have that one line for that one stretch.
Good. Excellent.
Back to community engagement for a second, Vince, in the comp
Yeah.
plan.
Yep.
After going through all the dialogue on Decatur over the last 60 days, it's been interesting to me how communicating the risk that we've just discussed has been so difficult and challenging for the community to understand. There's been a lot of allegations that this is scare tactics, this kind of manipulation. We're using fear to kind of push through a project that's not needed. And those are legitimate concerns, but it just brings up the fact, can we do a better job in communicating this specific topic and the risk? And then what's the county's play in the comp plan in terms of, if there's any play there, in terms of alignment with the reality of county load growth and how that's putting pressure on this extension cord that feeds the county. It's just an eye opener for me that the community comprehension of this issue and the threat and the risk and the reality of the funding limitations, that this is a greater county conversation when you get back to why would we do renewables, and back to Jerry's question, does it make sense to continue to pursue solar? How is that justified? I think it would be useful to have a more clear communication back to the county on how all this interrelates. The website's full of a lot of information. It's great, but it would be nice to see a really tight, coherent pushback on this so that folks can really understand what we're trying to communicate and why we're considering these different options. I just have lived it with all these discussions, and folks are struggling really hard. They want to be optimistic, they want to understand it, but it's complex. It's difficult to communicate.
I agree. Okay.
No question. Title, I think we all know where title is. I'll just kind of wrap up the topic. Good points, Tom. There's no question about it. Something I think we're learning a lot and getting better at it. And that's our goal when we're done with this, is to package that concise understanding and work with our county government to have them understand that power is not going to be reliable if we don't adjust the way that we conduct our business. Title, we're wrapping up the grant that we got for title. Remember, it was a study grant. So the study is complete. We still have some follow-ups. We extended the period for comments, and happy to kind of look at the tribal engagement and answer any questions that come up during that extended time frame. What happens is the process that comments go back to FERC, and then we track those as staff in our team, and we're able to respond to those kind of things. What I'm hoping for is that we take our title learning curve, package it up in a report, and have it available. We've always thought about title as an organization. I have a good publication that went back to like 1986, and there was an article written about why not title. So it's good to have complete, accurate, very thorough, detailed information about, the aspects of title. I know it's going to take a lot of federal funding to go forward with title, and I don't see it on the current administration. So I think it's going to take, once what we're going to do is we're just going to package the balance of the title effort and play it by ear as we go. With
Also,
that,
I've got a couple of questions for
Sure.
you on this. is is there a summary write-up of what has been learned on this study that you could share with the board? We'd have
Not
a
yet.
better understanding of exactly, you know, the issues that we've dealt with, the outcomes that we understand, and you know, where the costs are likely to be.
We're gonna have that later on. I don't know when we're gonna package that, but expect it, probably August, September. We'll package the results. We're still collecting them and putting a bow around the report. And as soon as we get to that level, that's where we'll summarize it and report back to you guys. How's that?
Okay, the key point I think that we've got to see in this is the applicability of this site to the overall performance of the O2, and as a result, what what are likely costs of electricity from this particular project?
You bet. And I'm on a capital side as well as an operational side. That's one of the driving forces.
Most definitely, because you know, at the end of the day, with everything we're talking about, you know, it's coming down to some very big numbers on the capital side. We obviously can't absorb them all at the same time. The question is, can we absorb any of them with, you know, best possible funding process that we could put in place? And I think those are the big questions that the board needs to be looking at and have some kind of advanced feel for how big these problems really are.
You got it. I mean, the neat thing about what you're bringing up for everybody to understand is we started, we got into a conversation about batteries. And when you look at tidal, it's about the comparison isn't KWH. It's about comparison to batteries, right? Because a tide can also work in the nighttime, and that's really unique. That's really expensive kilowatt hour time. And that's the equivalent of a battery deployment. So what you're saying is absolutely right, Jerry. We're going to package that once we got all the project components and all squared away, and we'll get you those details.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing that, because I don't think we can really move forward in a tangible way on any of this solar, renewable, and everything else until we have a better feel for the overall affordability of these options.
You got it. I fully agree with everything you're saying.
Okay, Foster, in the interest of time, on the remaining elements on this thing, only highlight something that really stands out or something you want special attention to. Then we'll take a break, and then I'd like to get into executive session.
You got it. Let's kind of run through there. Thanks for the quick nature. Now we're on the report side. Everyone is used to the reports that we have, the information that's available. So I won't belabor that. It's all available on our website. At this stage, we're doing really well. 2025 is turning out to be a pretty good year financially. We're still doing all the things that we need to from a grant side. You know, we have existing grants. Those are the ones that we're processing through. I don't see any new grants on the horizon. There may be some opportunities for some small ones through statewide Department of Commerce in Washington State Department of Commerce. Stay tuned on that. If there's something that we want to move forward with, we'll certainly update the board as we go through those logistics. But I don't see anything large on the horizon, at least right now. Let's keep going down. Financials look real good. Bottom line is the margins are very consistent with where we'd expect to see. Where there's some timing of our ECA where we're returning funds back to the members. We usually do that this time of the year. We come out of the winter time and we collect a lot because of the way the calculation works, and then we give credits back as it becomes warmer. Credits come back based on the way that we have our lag calculation working with the ECA. Suffice it to say that our numbers are very consistent with where we'd expect to be. Moving on to next page. A little warmer than we would really expect. I've heard things about, it's going to get colder. I don't know. I think, if you track the recent history going back to May of 24 through, we're really tracking more of the heaters, the heat wave side, not necessarily the neutral or the El Nino or La Nina, I mean. But we're balancing our world. The ECA is helping out, and I think the financials are still very solid for that kind of profile. History of our energy efficiency, or excuse me, energy assistance funding are really good. It's tracking to what we were doing last year. So well done. I think we have a really good assistance program for our members, and good job to the board for supporting that for energy assistance program. You kind of see the stats there. Our rebate programs are very helpful to the members, especially those that are out there building new homes are able to benefit, and replacement with both our rebates as well as our switch it up funding that's available. That's probably my favorite slide, is the one that's coming down the table. These are those switch it up funds. I alluded to this earlier, and just kind of put this mindset out there that we're going to put in for, this goes through Department of Agriculture, through RUS. RUS is a unique program of the federal government. It's one of the only ones that actually repays the government, right? Their loans, their low interest rate loans, and then and we pay them back to the government. Wow, there's something unique, right? So we hope that we can keep the program, for our Switch It Up, which is a REST program through Department of Agriculture. Since it gets paid back, our hope is, and NRECA is helping us convince the current administration to keep the program alive. It's really helpful. A lot of people benefit from it. We borrow funds for zero in the rest, and then we just have an administrative amount of 3% on those funds when people invoke a measure and then pay it back over their power bill. Love the program. We want to keep it going. I envision this to really help with member batteries. If we get this, we're going to put in for a big number, and my hope is that we can encourage people to incorporate batteries into their home worlds in the residential side. And with that, I think that'll give us some reliability advancements that are consistent with that one gentleman that we had from Holy Cross, if you remember, Brian. Put a communication side, because communications, let me go down to communication. This is really important. I got to give the biggest shout out to our communication team, and Krista and Joe and company and Beth and everybody else. We all play a role, but those two, Krista and Joe, do a fantastic job. You lose sight of all the complexity that we're running through, thinking that, well, we got to do a better job at communicating. We got 3 pages of fun here on what we do on a continuous basis, and we're learning more every day. I'm so impressed with all the stuff that we've been doing together and the learning to try to get something new. Embracing renewable generation is something that the nation is faced with and struggling with, and we're no exception. And I think that's, it shows that we're pretty nimble and we're able to really address that. And there's no one easy way to communicate with anybody on what we have. And we experience people that are just making information up. Now you got ChatGPT. If you tell it what you want it to say, it's going to tell you what you want to hear. So it's really interesting to be a communicator in this day and age. But anyway, just big shout out to our guys. Rock Island's doing great. We have we're delivering on our ARPA funds. There was a little bit of retrenching going on. You remember the BEAD funds? There was like a $10 million grant that we were hoping to get. It looks like the federal government is pulled that back, and they're going to make it competitive, they say, but it's probably going to go more towards a satellite option, unfortunately. So I think there's going to be preferential treatment to satellites, and they're going to work that into some of the internet funding going forward. I don't think that's going to turn us, competitive. I think that's going to be a Starlink kind of beneficial thing, and I don't think we're going to benefit from those in the future.
They're going to send it through our trees.
It's not going to work here. But I think there's going to be, when they redo the BEAD funding grant potential on the federal level, I'm hearing that there's going to be a Starlink, kind of slant to it. And they can provide a service that's cheaper. Now in our area, hopefully they don't submit anything because there's so many darn trees. But I'm still a little pessimistic on whether or not future funding is going to go. Do we need it? It's always nice to have. It gets areas that we, are really hard to pay for. From a financial perspective, we're solid. I mean, we got the ARPA funds. Those are we're going to be done with the middle mile of those projects by October of this year. So I can't say enough about how we're probably almost a year in advance of our ARPA funds, and I think that's really translated to some really good service for our internet customers at Rock Island. And I mean, I can't say enough about them. I just love, grant funds to deploy, and it looks like those are going to be harder to come by in the future. But it's not, we didn't expect them to begin with, and we don't necessarily need them for financial reasons. We just need them so we can hook more people up. But we're not done with options. We can look for other approaches as well.
Helen's done an amazing job.
Yeah, I can't say enough about Alan and everybody over there are just top notch. I mean, I really, it's hard to go to the areas that we're going at and still, be attentive to everybody, right? We're over at Center Island, Decatur Island, over at east side of Orcas, that's really in the middle of nowhere, and got some of the other areas, Mount Dallas. Those areas are really challenging, and they're doing a heck of a job through rock and all kinds of complexities and getting things to and fro different islands, and can't say enough about them. They're doing a great job. And with that, Vince, I think the only thing we have is appendix. There was some critical comments by some Decatur folks, and we wanted to make sure that you guys had a chance to read them. When people send something to connect with the board, that's
right.
Next, to make sure that we're extremely transparent, and it's included here.
Very good. Okay, let's reconvene at 11 o'clock. So I'm going to close out the regular session now and take a break and come back in executive session at 11 o'clock.
All right, see you at 11.
Thank you.